Welcome to Literature Through the Ages, a podcast analysing the ins and outs of any and all literature. This week we are joined by two incredible writers who will be introduced in just a moment, so keep listening to find out. There's no denying society has regressed substantially since the early ages of man to the present day, and what the world would now define as contemporary humanity. Development not only socially and culturally but politically, and this monumental ever-changing shift in morals and values can be documented in historical literature throughout time. Texts from the past can be compared to the present and studied to view society's progression. Thus, a comparison can be made analysing the resonances and dissonances between them. A specific example of this being Shakespeare's Richard III, side by side with Al Pacino's Looking for Richard. Today I'm joined by both Shakespeare and Al Pacino as we discuss what is the thing that gets between us and Shakespeare. Now Al, do you believe there is something in between us and the works of Shakespeare?
Yes, I do believe there is something between us as a contemporary society and Shakespeare, which is why I made Looking for Richard. Though Shakespeare is studied vastly throughout the world, there tends to be a barrier stopping modern audiences, especially young audiences, from connecting and fully understanding and interpreting the text.
And what do you think this barrier involves?
I believe this barrier is a multitude of things still possibly undiscovered by me. But personally, I would say the language is not as deeply appreciated, and the social themes and concepts in Richard III being so altered causes them to be misunderstood and criticized. Take the role of women, for example. In the 17th century, women were written to be submissive, naive, and if not, they were shrewish, difficult, and always disposable, like, "I'll have her, but I'll not keep her for long," Richard says. Nowadays, gender equality is far more enlightened, so for women to be written so inferiorly, it must be somewhat difficult to decode and assimilate for a female audience.
What do you think, William? Do you believe there to be a barrier between the 20th and 21st century and Shakespeare?
I must concur. I believe the works of the Jacobean era are not as thoroughly understood as they were during the tragedy's creation. The mammoth discrepancies between 1600s values and current values have altered audiences' views to not only view Richard as the vice, but demonise the text in its entirety.
Yeah, I think when analysing historical texts such as Richard III, it's important for audiences to understand the context behind it.
Al, could you tell me about your purpose in creating Looking for Richard?
It's always been a dream of mine to communicate how I feel about Shakespeare to other people. So, our main goal with this project is to reach an audience that would not normally participate in this kind of language and world, and dive deeper into why that is and why Shakespeare's works are not as accessible and popular as they once were. In playing Richard myself, I attempted to take something familiar, aka me, a modern man, and connect it to something unfamiliar like Shakespeare's Richard, essentially trying to bridge the gap of uncertainty and misunderstanding, proving resonance through intertextuality.
That's a really interesting point there about branching the two distinctly different eras, which brings me to my next question. William, how do you feel about the shift in form from your original tragedy to a mockumentary?
The shift in form, I believe, is beneficial in connecting historical and modern texts. It's not the 1600s anymore, and in order for texts to preserve their enduring relevance, form will often adapt with the times. The mockumentary style allows a personal experience with the viewer, whereas Richard III is written in a completely different dialect, blocking the ease of absorbing its messages to a contemporary audience.
Now, I wanted to discuss irony. Richard III is based on dramatic irony and an all-knowing audience through Richard's asides and soliloquies, and this irony is continued in Looking for Richard. Why did you choose to leave this element unchanged, Al?
Well, first off, transferring irony from a Shakespearean tragedy to a modern audience is not ambitious. Irony has and always will be irony. It remains consistent no matter the context. Secondly, this element, though similar to the original work, has tweaks and minor changes. For example, the irony in Richard III is based on humour and deception, essentially dramatic irony like in Richard's opening soliloquy, "Now is the winter of our discontent, made glorious summer by this son of York." The pun being son of York, as Richard is a son in the house of York, although the irony present in Looking for Richard is unseen irony, an example being the anger and arguments between me and fellow cast members. While the film is all about bringing Shakespeare to life, through meta-irony, we brought the anger of Richard himself into the tragedy and behind the scenes, his essence encompassing the film's entirety.
What about you, William? What are your thoughts on irony and its change between the texts?
Irony is only hypocrisy with style. They say life imitates art, and irony is no exception. Generally, people subconsciously mirror what they perceive as negative, a motif of anger and evil specifically becoming increasingly prevalent in society and literature. There is no story without some form of vice, whether it be physical, mental, or an illusion, and Al became his own vice in his version of Richard III, forming a most authentic and delicious irony.
Thank you both so much for coming on the show. It has truly been insightful and inspiring hearing your thoughts on modern intertextuality and its resonance and dissonance to historical texts. That's all this week on Literature Through the Ages. Tune in next week when we discuss The Handmaid's Tale and why it is the worst piece of literature ever created in history ever.